Hello there, it's Bacho here. The following video you're about to watch is part 3 of a Metropolis review series that I started when I first began my YouTube channel around a year and a half ago. It is admittedly a very late final installment of that review series. It's been one of these projects that's been sitting there for a while that I've just wanted to finish but I've never gotten around to doing it. It was all based off a Metropolis review that I wrote years ago. This will be the third and final part. Part 1 discussed mostly the production design, part 2 discussed the score and the narrative and the themes of the film, and this final part will be more so a documentative video on Fritz Lang, who is the director of Metropolis, and also discussing many of the different restorations that went underway for this film to be viewed in the modern era. Overall, this series was all about raising awareness for this cool sci-fi classic, and I really hope that people who haven't seen it already go out and watch it. It's a badass movie. You don't have to go watch the previous 2 videos, you can just go and watch Metropolis. Don't even watch the rest of this video, just go and watch that amazing film. Behind every great avant-garde work of art resides a mad genius trying to start a revolution, and director Fritz Lang is one of the earliest examples of such a sort in the film industry. He was a very distinguished director who was responsible for completely reinventing the science fiction genre. Not only that, but the themes he decided to tackle in his films took guts, particularly considering what the social climate was like all those years ago in a post-World War I Germany. The story in Metropolis alone, I speculate, addressed problems in society that most people didn't want to talk or even think about. Glaring issues that had arisen from the recent Industrial Revolution, which was also a heavy influence on the visual look of the film. Lang was concerned about the hardships that these new inventions would and were inflicting upon the working class, and was mindful to the lack of concern that the higher classes gave them. He was fearful of the future possibilities that were implied by these issues, and began to imagine a grandiose exaggeration of his fears that would become the vision for Metropolis. This is all speculation, I can't know for certain what he was thinking, but you can see just by watching the movie the type of thoughts he was entertaining. When he and producer Eric Pommer were travelling to America by boat to go to the opening of Die Nibelungen in New York, one of Fritz's previous films, he was completely overwhelmed when he first glimpsed this new modern city. He's alleged to have described it like this: the buildings seemed like a vertical curtain, shimmering and very light, an exuberant backdrop hanging from a dark sky that dazzles, distracts and hypnotizes. This was perhaps the genesis for Metropolis. As is the case with many other great directors, Lang was a man who took risks. The colossal production of the film testifies to that. He'd have vigorous shooting procedures and wouldn't make things easy for himself with the types of techniques he'd use when executing certain scenes. Fritz would often shoot with multiple cameras when filming, and when that was not possible, he would shoot numerous takes in order to make sure that he'd have at least 3 good versions of each shot. Normal now perhaps, but not back then. Actor Gustav Frolic, who played Frieda, had this to say about what it was like working with Lang on set. To work with Fritz Lang as a director was no picnic for anyone. His patience and his tenacity appeared to be infinite, as did his powers of persuasion, if necessary his downright manipulation. He also had a hypnotic effect on all his colleagues and pushed everyone to their limits. But nevertheless, work progressed calmly and efficiently, without yelling but with unyielding persistence. I do find it a little hard to believe that such a project like that didn't have any moments where the person at the centre of it all got stressed out or even started shouting at people, but if this is to be believed, it seems as though Fritz had all the assertiveness and respect needed to project his ideas into the film without ever needing to become an arsehole about it. A very respectable characteristic, I must say. Not everyone in the filmmaking industry has that level of cool about them. I think it's normal for directors who are against the grain and innovative to be very blunt and aggressive on set. They're very passionate people, but they're also these rare specimens. They're willing to risk pissing everyone off for the sake of experimentation and art. They are in and of themselves volatile beings, so it's to be expected that they sometimes become almost nasty during the process of bringing their visions to life. I mean, these guys are crazy. They can be really dangerous in many ways, as can the art they create and the ideas they express. But it's people like this, and people like Fritz Lang, who cast the largest shadows in their given art forms. films. And in Germany during the 1920s, a substantial era of film history was taking place. The German Expressionist movement gave way to all sorts of inventive and experimental filmmaking. It was an extraordinary time for artists in Germany, a glorious time for expression despite all else that was happening in Germany at the time and all that was about to take place. But then in 1933, shit hit the fan. These two arseholes named Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels came along and ruined the fun for everyone else. Fritz himself actually met Goebbels, who was impressed by Lang's ability as a filmmaker, so much so that he offered him the position of head of the German film studio UFA. Goebbels was even willing to completely overlook Fritz's film The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which had been banned for alleged anti-Nazi content. In spite of all this, Lang ended up deciding to not take this job offer from the Minister of Nazi Propaganda. Fritz actually had Jewish heritage and was fearful for his life, so he ended up fleeing to Paris and then later America, where he continued to make films under Hollywood. Unfortunately, his wife and co-writer of Metropolis, Theo von Harbou, stayed behind, having become a Nazi sympathiser, which isn't all that ideal. For a long time, the complete original cut of Metropolis was presumed to be forever lost, but throughout the years there were several attempts to re-edit and restore the film where new cuts were made once missing material was discovered around the globe. When Metropolis first premiered in Germany on January 1927, it was met with mixed reactions, a lot of critics saying that it was too long and complicated. The film was originally 2.5 hours long, however, before it even premiered in Germany, the Americans had it cut down to a shorter length for their audiences. That edit was conducted at the request of Paramount. In the summer of 1927, after its premiere, the German version was also cut down to match the American edit. It was shortened by 30 minutes and the footage that was cut was destroyed. The cut that remained was a structural mess because continuity had been ruined. For a significant period of time, people who tried to restore the film in later years couldn't piece together the actual order of all the scenes. As more material was unearthed, the film gradually became more complete, but it was only until 2008 where a complete copy of the original cut was discovered in a film archive in Buenos Aires. Once this was found, a definitive, complete, properly ordered cut was created, and it's the version I hold here. The film's original score was used as a blueprint for the sequencing of the scenes, as there was no copy of the Metropolis script that had survived that could be used as a structural guide. They knew what scenes and what shots went where based on the highs and lows of the music. The music itself was recomposed for the new restoration. There were still some scenes that had permanent damage and couldn't be restored properly for the film, so you can still see some rough and scratchy material here and there. Also, there were several frames that couldn't be saved and had to be replaced with title cards that describe the actions in the scene instead. It was only a few, however, and the vast majority of the film looks great considering how long it's been. Prior to this, however, there were many other restoration attempts that took place throughout history that never managed to get the film restored to its original runtime. There was an initial attempt in 1961. A Soviet film archive called Gosfilmofond had acquired a fragmented copy of the film when the Red Army seized the Reich Film Archive in Babelsberg after the war and brought various films back to the Soviet Union as war loot. They teamed up with the Czechoslovakian Film Archive in Prague, who possessed other parts of the film, and together they made a slightly improved version of the American cut. Years later, in 1971, various more copies and scenes had been passed around through different film archives around the world, and a young employee at the State Film Archive of the GDR noticed slight differences between two re-edits of the film. They then realised that there were different takes of the same shots that had survived, where previously it was assumed that only one version of each shot remained. After this was discovered, another attempt to restore the film was made in 1972, but without an original script to use as a guide for the assembly of the scenes, it was hard to know exactly what the original version actually looked like. Later on, Italian music producer Giorgio Moroder had obtained the rights to Metropolis, apparently outbidding David Bowie for them, and in 1984 he made his own re-edit of the film where he composed a new score and had famous artists perform the songs/instrumentals. Famous artists such as Freddie Mercury, Bonnie Tyler, Pat Benatar, Adam Ant and John Anderson were all involved in the project. This version was a copy of Metropolis from Britain, only they'd colorised the pictures. New restorations would would go under construction every time a significant piece of information regarding the film was uncovered, or when some old footage assumed to be lost would resurface in film archives or museums from different countries around the world. When the original German censor cards were accidentally discovered in Stockholm, yet another reconstruction went underway. The censor cards showed the original sequence of the whole film, and it was possible to assemble the scenes in the correct order. Many different pre-existing restorations and re-edits of Metropolis from all over the globe were used for this restoration. That one ended up having a runtime of 109 minutes. Then there was one other attempt in 2001, but there was still over 20 minutes missing, until finally they found a complete copy in Buenos Aires. Turns out an Argentinian distributor had acquired it in 1927 before it was altered and shortened, and a copy had found its way into the private collection of a film critic. However, it eventually became Argentinian state property. So for all these years, it was right there. And now, in present day, we can view this ancient piece of film history in all its original glory. A dense 2.5-hour sci-fi classic with a humble flair of social commentary in there for the intellectuals. So if you weren't thinking of watching Metropolis already, or you were putting it off, then maybe just consider the amount of effort that has gone into making this film possible to view for the audiences of today. It was thought to be forever lost, but it's managed to endure for almost 100 years. It's a precious piece of cinema that you're lucky to be able to witness. So overall, I suppose the take-home message of this video is fucking watch Metropolis.